more out-of-wedlock sexual encounters, including that of Rivera and Carlo's very own sister, Christina.
Continue painting. The process of this piece of shit painting I'm doing. Smoke American spirits.
By 1933, Carlo was living in New York City with her husband, Diego Rivera. Rivera was commissioned by Nelson Rockefeller to create a mural named Man at the Crossroads at the Rockefeller Center. Their time in New York would be cut very short, however, as Rivera tried to include the Russian communist revolutionary Vladimir Lenin in the painting. When the Rockefeller Center discovered this, they immediately stopped his work, and that part was painted over. The couple then had to move back to Mexico after this incident, and so they returned to live in a new house within the rural hamlet of San Angel. This return to Mexico would be met with much bitterness from Rivera, however. He was enjoying the fame and popularity he was receiving in the States, and never wished to go back. This would create a huge rift of conflict between him and Carlo, a conflict that would inspire one of Frida's most unique artworks, titled My Dress Hangs There, completed the year the couple moved back to Mexico. Although on this rare occasion, Carlo would not feature herself in this painting, there are so many things to uncover in this piece that truly reflect her mind during this period. Quite simply, Carlo is depicting the superficiality of American capitalism and consumerism. This painting is scattered with the icons of the modern industrial society of the United States, whilst also implying that society is decaying and that the fundamental human values are left in ruins. Although again, there is no sign of Carlo in this painting, right in the center, the conspicuous sides of one of her many traditional dresses can be seen hanging there, from a line attached to a golden trophy on the right and a toilet on the left. Most experts deduce that this is analogous to Carlo's feeling of losing her sense of self within the more frantic and chaotic world of the big American cities. As if to say, I may be in America, but only my dress hangs there. My heart still remains in Mexico. Or maybe that she felt that the only thing that still belonged to her during her time in America was her Mexican heritage.
Now we gotta go help people customize and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Maybe where's the golf cart? There it is. Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
P.
Hey everybody, Walton Goggins here. Starting a business is never easy, but with GoDaddy Aero, that endeavor is about to become a whole lot easier.
Hey man, you got this.
Create a website that looks like you know what you're doing, even if you don't know what you're doing, because you're using a website that developed a tool that knows exactly what it's doing. It helps you design a logo. This is what we came up with. We put it here, we put it everywhere on our website, and we even put it right here. What I'm telling you, from one central command center, you can have all your social media empire operating. You're doing it all. Everything.
AI.
Let's go, Daddy!
Fuck AI. AI can't make this piece of garbage.
The two supporting objects of the toilet and trophy could be seen as Frida's attempt to subtly mock the American obsession with efficient plumbing and the preoccupation with sports by setting them upon pedestals. There are many other clues similar to this as well, such as her targeting business, religion, and the eclecticism of American culture. A garbage can is overflowing with waste, whilst a crowd of thousands of people at the bottom seem to be overflowing themselves, clambering over each other to reach the promises of fame and fortune that America continuously preaches to the masses. Even the scale of the objects compared to the crowd and positioning them right at the bottom, underneath all of this iconography, could symbolize how Carlo viewed the treatment of the common people compared to the rich business owners and celebrities. In the stained glass window of the church is a red dollar sign wrapped around the cross. Next to the church is a billboard and what looks like Mae West displayed on it, hinting that the film star represents false values, vanity, luxury, and the worship of manufactured beauty. The advert is peeling from the edges, and the building below is burning. Perhaps a hint from Carlo that nothing is deemed
horrible.
permanent, even within capitalism.
I don't even know how to paint.
Whether Carlo truly felt this disenchanted by America or not, it was still plainly clear that Mexico would always be her home, though it would unfortunately be of no help to improving the relationship with her husband. In the following year of 1934, Frida would experience yet another miscarriage, which may have inspired the painting, titled Me and My Doll, completed not long after. By the time this was painted, Frida had lost many unborn children by this stage. She had also been collecting dolls and grown a collection of pets, which she apparently devoted her maternal love to. These pets that included tropical birds and even monkeys would, as we'll soon see, make more prominent appearances in her paintings in the years to come. In this painting though, it depicts Frida sitting on a bed with supposedly one of her dolls, but she also seems distant and disconnected with the substitute of her baby. She stares ahead directly at the viewer, almost as if she is completely unaware that the doll is even there. If you look closely, you can also see that she's holding a cigarette. Smoking around a child, even back then, was considered to be very irresponsible, amplifying her detachment to the doll next to her. If this was a sign of her giving up hope to bear a child, there was yet even worse heartache to come. Rivera continued to have many affairs, and Carlo too would regularly cheat on her husband in return in bouts of revenge. Diego would practically turn a blind eye to Frida's female lovers, but would become madly jealous whenever he would discover Frida's affairs with other men. Perhaps it would be this jealousy that led to a breaking point in 1935, when Rivera had an affair with Carlo's younger sister, Cristina. Distraught, enraged, and heartbroken, as far as Carlo was concerned, this was the final straw. The couple would live in separate homes from here onwards, and she would aid her pain through yet more secret lovers, and of course, through her art. In this portrait, titled Self-Portrait with Curly Hair, completed the same year of Rivera's
Such a
affair with
failure.
Cristina, it shows the results of Carlo
Will
cutting
never
off
be
her
as
hair
good as
in
anybody.
retaliation to the event, as Diego was reportedly very fond of her long flowing hair.
I'm the Bob
But
Ross
this would
of
only be
failure.
one revealing painting out of many others
Bob
that
Ross
reflect
is
this time in
schizophrenia.
Carlo's life. In fact, around this time of their first divorce and the subsequent reunion that followed, some of Carlo's most recognizable paintings would emerge, not to mention that a lot of her work from this period are some of
The
her most
Bob Ross
powerful,
of
such as this portrait
horrible
titled Memory,
paintings.
the Heart, completed in 1937. Some experts believe this to be a prime example of Carlo expressing her misery and resentment over the affair that happened 2 years prior. In this painting, her face is nearly expressionless, yet tears can still be seen running down her cheeks. She still has short, cropped hair and is wearing the European-style clothes, which style became her favorite when she separated from Rivera. And as always, she uses the physical wounds to imply her psychological pain. In the background is a school uniform, a Tuana costume, and each set of clothes have one arm, with Carlo standing there without arms and seeming helpless. She stands there with one foot on the ground and the other in the sea. This foot also wears an apparatus and suggests the foot surgery she was undergoing at the time. The biggest giveaway that suggests she was utterly heartbroken is a huge heart that lies on the ground at her feet and was pumping rivers of blood in the background landscape.
Hiring shouldn't be a job in itself. With Upwork, it isn't. Upwork is the one-stop shop for finding and hiring freelance experts in over 125 categories. Pros you can count on for quick tasks and the big picture. Just share your project needs, check reviews and work history, and find your fit with a little help from Upwork's AI. No headcount, no big commitments, no endless searching. It's how businesses hire smarter in 2026. Go to Upwork.com and post a job for free.
It should be just a hobby. Still gonna make 1,000 paintings, and I still am
No,
not good
magic
at that.
is
It's
stronger
the
than
failure
suspicion.
and worthless.
Cast by fate, tested by time, and never broken.
I'm horrible at painting. Just
wrong
not
with you?
good.
Are you like 6? Are you
I'll
6?
never be great. Just
You need to get out there, Sal. Have a little fun. When was the last time you were touched? I have my family, and I'm not receiving text with photos that I did not ask for. Oh, let me tell you about Chad. Oh, we know
Truly,
plenty
you need
about
to-
Chad. Come on.
Remember when Mom would tell stories where everyone who fell in love died? You don't believe we're cursed? No. We're Owen's women. Love is our undoing. What if you guys were all just a little bit dramatic? Here's the thing about magic. It won't be silenced.
Is this real? Was he gonna die?
It's true. We're witches.
I'm a failure.
This is true.
I'm super terrible.
Kylie said she's gonna go and fix the curse.
This will lead her into the dark path. If you want to find her,
That was never
we have to
good.
work together. My blood,
Thinking about going back to school, back
He's
to
a scholar of the craft
at least community college or technical college for
and on unmarked flesh. Go.
digital
He's just
design.
been
But
done, Jillian. Was
if
it
you won't
always?
get anywhere,
God,
it's
what is wrong with you?
so what? I'm tired of not doing it.
I can't even sense her right now.
You're afraid of your power.
well, I've seen what my power can do. The idea that they may have the same power terrifies me. When you have someone who knows who you were and who you will always be,
There's
There's
always
no
people
deeper
better
tie.
than me.
no
There
stronger
always
bond.
will be.
I want you to know if anything happens to me, Jillian, it's you. You're my person.
That doesn't mean I should stop
Okay,
doing
do you have your
art.
clothes on?
Her body is pierced by a steel rod with seesawing cupids on either end,
Did sell
creating an
comic
accurate
books.
visualization of the sensation of the love-induced pain that she was experiencing. There are also some paintings that reveal much to us about her secret relationships, especially the ones that followed the affair between Christina and Diego. This
Wow.
painting, titled
Well,
Self-Portrait Dedicated to Leon Trotsky, or sometimes known as Between the Curtains, was also completed in 1937. On the surface, nothing heavily symbolic can be seen, but what's most significant is who exactly the person this painting is dedicated to. Following the Christina and Diego affair, and in the build-up to the divorce that would soon follow, Carlo was more rebellious and resentful towards Rivera than ever, and was eager to get her own back. This is where Leon Trotsky comes in. Trotsky was a Russian political rival of Joseph Stalin at the time, and was deeply committed to the theories of Marxism, a way of thinking that both Rivera and Carlo admired. In 1936, Stalin finally chased the
Snorting
rival Trotsky
tobacco.
into exile. Unable to find asylum in other countries,
Snorting
Frida's
ketamine.
husband, Diego Rivera, persuaded the Mexican president, Lázaro Cárdenas, to grant Trotsky
Drug
asylum
addiction.
in their country. In January of
Drug
1937,
addict.
Leon Trotsky and his wife, Natalia Sedova, arrived in Mexico and were greeted personally by Carlo. She gave them the use of her blue house in Coyoacan, where they lived for the next 2 years. During that time, the Riveras and the Trotskys spent a lot of time together, and in the early summer of 1937, Carlo and Trotsky
I've been
began
reading.
a secret love affair.
Bought 2
Trotsky was
books.
notoriously attracted to younger women, and Carlo would be keen to use her seductive talents to her advantage. But before long, Kahlo grew tired of Trotsky, whom she called the old man, and the affair soon ended. After their relationship ended in July, Frida painted this self-portrait and gave it to Trotsky, who hung it on the wall in his study. In April of 1939, the Trotskys moved from a blue house, and Trotsky, at the request of his wife, left the painting behind. Now, we may have already seen glimpses of this within Frida Kahlo's work, but by 1938, many of her paintings began to take on a darker atmosphere and resonate far more eerie themes than before. Even her use of colors was seemingly becoming more muted and cold. A good first stop to show what I mean would be her painting titled Four Inhabitants of Mexico, completed that same year. Here Kahlo presents us with some interesting personalities, such as a Judas, a pre-Columbian symbol of the Nayarit, a skeleton of the sort that children like to dangle on the Day of the Dead, and in the distance, a straw man riding a donkey.
Milton loves rocks, so he bought a .rocks domain name with Squarespace, so you can see his rocks and buy his rocks and sit on his
great.
rocks.
I got red Kino. Period blood. I have no talent whatsoever.
Kahlo
Sometimes I
depicts
feel like I
herself
should just
as a
kill
toddler,
myself.
sitting on the ground, sucking her fingers,
I still
and
won't
holding
do
onto her
that.
skirt.
No matter
It's
how many pills
theorized
I
that Kahlo
take.
is expressing a feeling of
This is
consternation
what
because
a
her
saying
mother
I
has
would
left
say.
her to sit unattended.
No amount of
She
pills
looks
can
on in
stop
amazement
the
at the pregnant
everlasting
mud
dread
and
of
clay figure
nihilism.
and the skeleton in front of her. The mud figure, with her broken and repaired head, addresses Mexico's past. Since the fronts of her feet are missing, we know she also stays for Frida, who had different foot operations in the 1930s, one of which, in 1934, included the evacuation of parts of her toes to her right foot. Unquestionably, none of the four inhabitants of Mexico take any notice of Frida. She's connected with them, but just by the touch of their shadows. It really does give off the impression that we're witnessing a jarring dream of Frida's coming to life. In the same year, she would complete another strange and unsettling painting with similar Day of the Dead themes, titled Girl with Death Mask, or sometimes referred to as She Plays Alone. The girl presented in the painting is again believed to be Kahlo herself, wearing a skull mask. This kind of mask is a tradition at the annual Mexican festival Day of the Dead, where death is something that's celebrated, or at least more openly accepted, instead of something that's heavily mourned and feared. The little girl is holding a yellow blossom in her hand. My sensations, my states of mind, and the profound reactions that life has been producing in me, I have frequently objectified all this in figures of myself, which were the most sincere and real thing that I could do in order to express what I felt inside and outside of myself. End quote. Following her return to Mexico, the inevitable finally happened. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera officially divorced at the end of the year, and this separation would inspire one of Kahlo's largest and most well-known paintings of her entire repertoire. The painting, titled The Two Fridas, would be completed shortly after her divorce to Diego Rivera. This painting has been discussed frequently by critics, historians, and art fans from all over the world for decades, making it undeniably one of her most heavily researched paintings. This portrait shows two personalities of Frida Kahlo. One is the more traditional Frida in her Tijuana costume, a Frida rejected by Rivera with a broken heart, sitting next to a more independent, modern dress Frida with a heart seemingly well intact. In Kahlo's diary, she alluded to the idea that this painting originated from her memory of an imaginary childhood friend. Later, she admitted it expressed her desperation and loneliness that came with the separation from Rivera. In this painting, the two Fridas are holding hands. They
Mustard.
both have visible hearts, and the heart of the traditional Frida is cut and torn open. The main artery, which comes from the torn heart
Mustard.
down to the right hand of the traditional Frida, is cut off by surgical scissors held in a lap. Some theorize that it may represent the beauty and fairness implied by the white dress being lost by the smearing of blood on it.
What you want to do is save hundreds when Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance.
That's great, but can you ask your friend to stop digging into the green?
I can ask, but he's not going to. Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Yo, new beat.
I need more black paint.
I'm kind of feeling this.
If we look at the left hand of the other Frida, you may notice her holding a small oval-shaped portrait or locket of some sorts, again attached to a vein that connects to her heart. Although left purposely obscured, many keen-eyed experts believe this to be an image of Diego Rivera when he was a child. Although generally people agree that due to the symbolism used and the time frame this was created in, as well as what Kahlo wrote in her diary, that this painting was made to reflect Kahlo's sorrow during the divorce, many different meanings can emerge from this piece due to its subtlety. Some say it may also symbolize Kahlo's different identities, namely her European and Mexican identities, evident in the dresses she wears. Furthermore, some have also said that it again refers to her frequent visits to the operation table due to her injuries and constant physical health issues, or possibly a combination of all of these themes merged into one. The heartache that Frida felt following the divorce between her and Diego would be in the end very short-lived. No more than a year later, in September 1940, Kahlo traveled to San Francisco for treatment from a doctor, and it would be here, only a few months later, that she would reconcile with Diego and they remarried in December. Although a second chance lay before them, their second marriage would be no different from the last. They would continue to live separate lives in separate houses, along with acting out their relentless habits of infidelity. Within her art, though, her skills and versatility as an artist was well and truly improving. In the year of 1940, she would complete two more of her most recognizable portraits, such as a painting titled Self-Portrait, dedicated to Dr. Alessa. Dr. Leo Alessa was one of Frida's most trusted physicians and medical advisors, who would tend to and look after Kahlo right up to her final days. As the title suggests, Kahlo dedicated this painting to him, possibly as a thanks to him when he treated the pain that was in her right foot during her stay in San Francisco. There are some heavily Catholic Christian themes that are noticeable in this painting, most significantly the necklace of thorns, which appears to be drawing blood from her neck. It's an interesting piece to research in depth, as many sources seem to suggest that this indicates Kahlo's fascination in the graphic nature of a retelling of Jesus Christ's crucifixion that existed around her growing up in Mexico. In many Christian households and churches, it was not uncommon in Mexico to see an emphasis on crucifixion, as well as the bloody details of it. She would even have many of these types of Christian art in her own home, and it would seem many of her self-portraits follow a similar train of thought. Another well-known portrait of hers during this time, titled Self-Portrait with Necklace of Thorns and a Hummingbird, again, as the title suggests, returns us to this very same theme from the last one. This small portrait displays many aspects which are symbolic to Frida Kahlo. She faces the viewer with a background of large green leaves and a yellow leaf right behind her. The thorns are around her neck like a necklace, which is held by a black monkey, possibly a depiction of her pet spider monkey named Fulang Chang. Her neck is again bleeding from the thorns piercing her skin. On the right side, behind her shoulder, is a black cat, which again may have been one of her many pets at the time. Finally, a dead hummingbird appears to be dangling from a thorn necklace. Her expression is calm and solemn, almost as if she is patiently enduring the pain whilst looking directly into the viewer's eyes. But what of the symbolism that's used in this piece? Often a bird symbolizes freedom and life within art, but the hummingbird is especially telling, which is usually colorful and always hovering above flowers. But in this painting, the hummingbird is dark and lifeless. This alone might be a symbol of Frida herself, someone who used to feel free and beautiful, only to become a husk of her former self, since she endured yet more physical pain and disfigurement since her fateful bus accident when she was 18. In the following year of 1941, by this time her portraits were beginning to garner a lot of attention and buzz within the local art scene. In fact, during this same year, she received a commission from the Mexican government for 5 portraits of important Mexican women. However, she would be unable to complete the project when her work was once again interrupted by tragedy. On April 14th, 1941, Kahlo's father, Guillermo Kahlo, died of a heart attack. This loss, mixed with the continuing chronic pain that she was suffering, would be almost unbearable for her. It's important to remember that her father was primarily responsible for her avid interest in art and was always the parent who was closest to her, helping her frequently throughout her younger days to overcome her health issues. She often saw him as being a brave and intelligent man. Now that he had passed, the only prominent male role model left in her life was her estranged husband.
What do you do when you need to grow your team fast? You use Upwork to tap specialized talent across 125 categories.
My chief of staff is from Upwork. Leveraging Upwork is a huge, secret advantage that we have.
Sign up and post a job for free.
People have lots of opinions when it comes to our bodies. Our shapes, how we dress, even our birth control.
Time out.
Since when is it anyone's business but yours? Birth control is your decision. Mirena is over 99% effective at preventing pregnancy for up to 8 years. Reversible if plans change. Don't use Mirena if you have a pelvic or genital infection, get infections easily, or have certain cancers. Less than 1% get a serious infection called pelvic inflammatory disease. After placement, if you have persistent pelvic or stomach pain,
shut up.
It would be at least 10 years before Frida decided she would paint her father after his death. In the painting titled Portrait of My Father, completed in 1951. At the bottom of the painting, in the style of an ex-voto, the artist wrote the following message, quote, "I painted my father, Wilhelm Kahlo, of German-Hungarian origin, a photographic artist by profession, generous, intelligent, and refined in character, and brave because he suffered from epilepsy for 60 years, but never stopped working and fought against Hitler. Adoringly, his daughter, Frida Kahlo." End quote. As devastating as the loss of her father may have been, in spite of her continuing toxic marriage, her relentless physical pain, as well as her increasing alcohol habits where she used to combat it, the beginning of the 40s, as far as her art would be concerned, would prove to be a significant time in her life. More questions were abound at this point as to who exactly this mysterious Mexican artist was that was beginning to fill more and more exhibitions, both nationally and abroad. The art that would follow would be just as elusive and would continue to open up yet more windows into the mind of this extraordinary individual. Following the deep depression that stemmed from the loss of her father in 1941, Frida Kahlo from this period onwards began to experience yet more health complications that only seemed to get worse. She found herself more frequently bedbound within her famous house, La Casa Azul, or the Blue House, which by this time had become a regular place of refuge for her creativity and comforts. Being unable to travel as often as she would like, it's more than likely that this would prompt her to write as well as paint to preoccupy her mind by starting her intimate illustrated diary in 1942, where Kahlo would document her thoughts, poems, and even her dreams. Her declining health may have been restricting her gradually more and more as the years went by, but her career in art was only continuing to flourish and evolve. In the following year of 1943, Kahlo was appointed as a professor of painting at La Esmeralda, the Education Ministry School of Fine Arts. After only a few months, however, she was forced by poor health to hold her classes at home in Coyoacan, truly emphasizing how much Kahlo would remain resilient against her restricting health in order to still achieve her ambitions. It would also be during this year that she would release another one of her most recognizable portraits, which she in fact started painting 3 years prior, titled Self-Portrait as a Tuana. There is already a clue as to what this painting represents within the year that this was first painted, as well as the instantly noticeable face of Diego Rivera that can be seen on Frida's forehead. This painting is believed to have been started during August of 1940, the time period of which she and Rivera were briefly separated. An even bigger clue is revealed within its alternative titles of Diego in My Thoughts and Thinking of Diego. Quite simply, this painting expresses Kahlo's desire to hold on to Rivera, who continues betraying her with his affairs with other women. But in spite of their divorce, as evidenced by the miniature portrait of him on her forehead, it seems Frida cannot get him out of her mind. She again displays herself in an elaborate Mexican traditional Tuana costume. On her head, she appears to be wearing leaves, and the roots resembles that of a spider's web. It's believed that this might represent her thoughts that have trapped Rivera within them. Ever since surviving her violent bus accident 19 years prior, the permanent damage it caused to Kahlo's body would cause some of the most unimaginable chronic pain. We already know that frequent visits to doctors, physicians, and surgeons was a huge part of her daily life because of this, but it would become apparent that the pain she suffered from her irrevocably damaged spine would play a particularly hindering role in her life. Frida would undergo a total of 32 surgeries throughout her lifetime, as well as the need to wear 28 different medical corsets for extended periods. And by 1944, her physical pain became so unbearable that the need to express this in her art could no longer be restrained, which brings us once again to that famous portrait of hers titled The Broken Column, painted by Kahlo that very same year. Now, I know I've already briefly mentioned this painting, but since we've reached a certain point in her life, I think it's worth looking at again in more depth. As described by many sources, this single portrait, out of many of her other portraits that express her pain, this one by far portrays it in the most brutally honest fashion compared to her other works. Here, Kahlo again seems to stare directly at the viewer with eyes that are streaming tears down her face. Her hair is not tied up like it often is in her portraits, but instead it's lying limply behind her shoulders. Not only is she unclothed, with just a medical corset and a bedsheet around her, spotlighting a sense of vulnerability to us, but she also stands isolated in a desolate wasteland and completely alone, which, other than her noticeable tears, signifies her emotional state at the time. But as well as baring her skin, she also goes a step beyond and displays what lies inside of her. Her skin is torn open along the midline of her torso, revealing a chrome or stone-like pillar in the center, serving as her spinal column. If you look closely, the pillar appears to be cracked in many places and seemingly falling apart. What I find particularly interesting regarding a background as well, at least from a creative point of view, is how much like her cracked pillar spine, the ground itself behind also appears to be cracked, as if there's a chaotic earthquake happening behind her, serving as a mirror image to her physical and emotional states. The many nails that cover her body and the white sheet are theorized to be symbolic of how her poor health has restrained her, literally pinning her down, refusing to let her free. Or, on the other hand, as you may notice, the pins seem to trickle all the way down her right leg, but not her left. So this may also be hinting at when she had polio when she was younger, and how her right leg was affected as a result. However, it's also perfectly plausible to assume that these many piercing pins could represent how Carlo is basically covered in pain. But what makes it more harrowing is her seemingly calm composure and her emotionless face despite her tears. It's almost as if her body is reacting to the pain, but mentally she's become numb to it, as if she's just helplessly letting herself be consumed by it. After this particular spinal surgery, she was made to wear the metal corset as part of her recuperation and support for her back, which could be seen in some photographs taken during this period. In the years that followed, Carlo's health problems would only continue to affect her in different ways. For example, this painting titled Without Hope was painted in the year of 1945, when Carlo was forced to be fed by the prescription of her doctor. In the back of his painting, Carlo wrote down the following explanation, quote, "Not the least hope remains to me. Everything moves in time with what the belly contains." End quote. At this time, Carlo was suffering from a lack of appetite due to her many surgeries and numerous illnesses. She became very thin and malnourished. Her trusted doctor, Dr. Alessa, would have no choice but to prescribe her complete bed rest and a forced fattening diet of pureed food every 2 hours. In this painting, Frida Kahlo depicts what she went through with the forced feeding diet. The grotesque-looking food, consisting of offal, animals, and skulls, is fed to her via a large funnel held by the wooden structure, theorized to be the same used to hold her canvases for painting. It seems her arms are held tightly underneath her bedsheet, and again she seems helpless. The background is another deserted landscape, showing both the burning sun and the moon in the distance. In the following year of 1946, Carlo's back had worsened to the point that she could no longer sit or stand continuously, and again had to return to the hospital bed for yet more surgery to her spine, this time in New York, which would prompt Carlo to create the painting titled The Wounded Deer, another one of her most familiar works. Although Frida would endure a total of 7 spinal surgeries throughout this time in her life, this particular operation is considered arguably one of her most devastating, given its context. It was believed that this would be the surgery to end all surgeries, to cure her back pain once and for all, but sadly, it failed, and this painting expressed her disappointment that came with the procedure. Carlo here places her head with 2 antlers protruding on either side on a young stag that appears to be fatally wounded by 9 arrows. Some experts believe this particular deer was modeled by one of Frida's own pets, her pet deer named Granizo. The background is a dark forest with dead-looking trees and broken branches. It's almost as if the stag was fleeing through some foreboding woodland to reach the clearing in the distance.
Get a GoDaddy website, email, and matching domain bundled together for one low price. It's everything you need to bring your business online, bundled together to help you grow and save. Start today at...
She's holding a flag which has the words from the song Silito Lindo, Tree of Hope, Remain Strong. On the flagpole there is a red tip that is believed to either represent a surgical instrument stained with blood or a paintbrush dipped in red paint. The barren landscape behind her has 2 fissures, which is theorized to be a metaphor of the wounds on her back. Frida worked on this painting for one of her patrons named Eduardo. In a letter to him, Frida mentioned, quote, "There is a skeleton, or death, that flees in the face of my will to live." But later she removed the skeleton, apparently to please Eduardo. In his portrait, by putting 2 Fridas together, it seems one is a victim of a botched surgery, but the other is the heroic survivor. In a very real sense, Carlo is expressing her determination not to stray from hope. Here she is becoming her own heroine and taking charge of her destiny. By the end of the 1940s, Carlo's health was deteriorating rapidly. After returning from hospital, her health became so bad that she would be confined to a wheelchair and would need assistance from nurses for much of the rest of her life. And of course, on top of this, the relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera, all the while had changed very little. Although Carlo understandably could not engage with her promiscuous tendencies as much anymore due to her health problems, Rivera, on the other hand, would continuously be unfaithful to her, something that yet again could be determined in her art around this time, especially within her portrait titled Diego and I, completed in 1949, one of the very last paintings that she would make that would include the appearance of Diego Rivera. In this work, Carlo expresses great anguish over Rivera after he had attempted to leave Frida for a beautiful Mexican film star named Maria Felix, who was also an intimate friend of Frida's. The three had first met not too long prior while she was filming for the 1948 movie Hidden River. Even though Frida was trying to joke about this attempted affair, as she always did with Rivera's other affairs, Diego and I shows that she was deeply hurt by this particular encounter. After instantly hitting it off with Frida and Diego, Maria stayed with the couple for a while in Mexico City, including at Frida's blue house, the Casal Azul in Coyoacán. Diego, enamored by the elegant Maria, not only insisted on painting her, but wanted her to pose naked for him. However, she was having none of it. When the finished work was revealed, Maria was reportedly offended, and in a brutally honest manner, she called it, quote, muy malo, basically meaning very bad in English. She later demanded that the painting be amended to cover her body. Maria would continue to berate Diego's work. Quote, I never liked Rivera's painting. I wanted him to paint me in Tijuana, but he said it was very vulgar, so he painted me as he wanted, naked, because he was very much in love with me. Later, Diego wanted that portrait for an exhibition in fine arts, but since I did not lend it to him, he stopped talking to me for more than a year. End quote.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is important. The shooter who murdered my sweet little Daniel brought a highly lethal weapon with him to my son's first grade classroom at Sandy Hook Elementary. In approximately 4 minutes, he shot 154 bullets, killing 20 children and 6 educators. Now, Congress is working on solutions to prevent school shootings. The kind of legislation that might have saved my sweet son Daniel from being murdered. We need your voice with us to help us ramp up the pressure on Congress and keep kids safe in their classrooms. Please sign our petition right now and demand Congress finally take action to prevent school shootings.
Upwork puts the world's best freelance talent right at our fingertips. We need an AI chatbot for customer service. Upwork's AI combs through thousands of freelancers to help match us with the...
Get a match, get moving. Upwork.
spite of all this, though, Diego still relentlessly lusted for Maria, to a point where he had even written to her asking her to marry him. Just to give you an idea of how desperate Rivera was to win Maria's affection, here's an example of what he would write to the actress. Quote, "I was sick at the moment you cabled, he was well known." Outside of her art, Frida remained extremely passionate regarding her political beliefs. Not long prior, she had rejoined the Mexican Communist Party, and in the year of 1951, in light of an atomic war on the horizon, Kahlo would join in the campaign for peace. In the mural created by Diego Rivera titled "The Nightmare of War and the Dream of Peace," he illustrates Frida Kahlo herself in her wheelchair, seemingly portraying her collecting a list of signatures to support the peace movement. Kahlo's painting titled "Congress of People for Peace," completed in 1952, again shows us signs of her undying spirit, passion for social justice, and hope for the people.
Jane runs a camp, and you know it's a camp because she bought a .camp domain name with Squarespace so that you can sign up and go to her camp.
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything I need to get done in a list view. Next, I set a priority and a due date to keep things on track. I create custom statuses to organize my progress exactly how I want. I like to add the action items field so AI can show me the next steps. I add my teammates as watchers so they're in the loop. ClickUp makes work easy, from personal projects to running a multi-billion-dollar company. Click the link below to create your workspace for free.
Like some of her other works that we've already seen, Frida depicts another night and day background. In the middle of the painting sits a peace dove, and the title of the painting can be seen engraved close to the tree roots. Although her painting ability due to her poor health was noticeably affected, that did not in any way hinder her growing success, nor her reputation within the art world. In 1953, the first female photographer of Mexico, Lola Alvarez Bravo, organized the only solo exhibition of Frida Kahlo's works that the artist would live to see in her gallery called the Gallery of Contemporary Art. Bravo would be responsible for many iconic photographs of Kahlo after they would become close friends through their intimate circles. Frida Kahlo attended the opening, but because her health was so poor, she had to attend whilst lying in bed. It would be in August of that year that Kahlo contracted gangrene, and her right leg, that had caused her so much low self-esteem throughout her entire life, had to be amputated below the knee. In 1954, the final year of her life, portraits were beginning appearing once again in her art. And even in her failing health, it would seem, her desire to express her passionate beliefs was still very strong indeed. This can be seen in a 1954 unfinished painting titled "Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick." This painting shows how, despite being bedbound, Kahlo was nevertheless trying to serve her political campaigns by introducing a political view into her work during the last few years of her life. Here, Frida embraces the utopian belief that she and all other people in this world can be freed from pain and suffering and saved by the socio-economic foundation of Marxism, which, as we already know, she was a particular advocate for. The face of Karl Marx himself can be seen in the top middle right. Kahlo displays herself wearing her medical corset and standing against a divided background, consisting of one half that represents peace and the other half that contains destruction, such as a mushroom cloud seen in the lower right-hand side. Here, her health seems to be cured by two large hands, which are symbols of Marxism. In her own hands, she holds a red book of Marxism as she simultaneously tosses aside her crutches. She later commented on this painting, quote, "For the first time, I am not crying anymore," end quote. What could easily be seen as her most moving final portrait work, though, is a painting that she in fact started working on during the 40s, but again never reached completion. Her painting known as Portrait of Frida's Family. She apparently worked consistently on this painting during her stay in the hospital in 1950, but after her older sister Matilda passed away in 1951, she stopped working on it to start her Portrait of My Father painting that we've already seen. In this work, it seems Kahlo is truly reflecting on her loved ones and those who have affected her during her life. On the top are her grandparents, and in the center, her parents Guillermo and Matilda. In the bottom, Frida stands at the landscape with a car.
Went to the gas station.
Although the finished painting we see here would not be seen until a few years later, what once existed under these many chaotic brushstrokes of oil paints, he began working on a familiar-looking subject during his stay at the cottage. In this photograph taken of the painting before it was edited over, and originally called Figure Getting Out of a Car, we can see more clearly the distinctive shape of one of the three figures in a more experimental and subdued form. You can even slightly make out the appearance of the snarling and growling mouth that also appears in his later masterpiece. It would seem Francis was finding his inspiration again, and in fragments of creative genius, he was putting together a style that would stand out from the others, all due to the fact that instead of hiding from fear and dread, he reveled in it. And instead of being swayed by his mentors to make his paintings more beautiful, a word that Francis would grow to mock and despise, his paintings were now
something you see on
LSD. Francis would not remain outside of London for long, despite his obvious dangers. In late 1943, Francis moved back to London, into the ground floor of number 7 Cromwell Place, South Kensington, and again joined by Nanny Lightfoot. Although it would seem Francis was still experimenting as a painter and going back to old habits of borrowing and swindling money, little did he know that the following year was about to thrust Francis Bacon into the very main spotlight of the art world.
How do you say that word? Aghast.
During the years of 1943 and 1944, Britain was still a country at war, a war that was now affecting people on a global scale far more considerably than anyone had first imagined. But thankfully for London residents, the bombings were now becoming less frequent, as Germany was now forced to turn its attention towards Britain and the United States Allied Forces, Russia. The Red Army were, by this time, close to ending Adolf Hitler's campaign in Europe, and by 1945, the news would eventually surface that they were now well on their way to Berlin. This would signify that at long last, the Nazis would soon surrender, and the war was close to an end. During these final years of a war, Francis would also begin to enjoy a rather eccentric lifestyle in his new abode in South Kensington. His new townhouse of number 7 Cromwell Place was once the home of another respected artist, pre-Raphaelite painter John Everett Millais. Francis leased and resided in the ground floor of the building. Previously a billiard room, the large space was converted into a studio equipped with a skylight. The floor above was the bombed remains of John Millais' studio space, which he used for artificial lighting. Francis would sleep in the one bedroom that the flat provided, leaving Nanny Lightfoot, who was still accompanying him, to turn the kitchen each night into a sort of makeshift bedroom, or mentioned by art historian and former friend of Francis, John Richardson, in the Brushwood Violence documentary, she would, quote, sleep on a kitchen table.
Brink of insanity.
It should also be mentioned that Francis was still part of the Air Raid Precaution Service, and bombardment from German aircraft was still occasional. Though now that the Blitz was coming to an end, his services were required less often, allowing him more ample time to focus on his painting in his new studio. By 1945, the war was now on the verge of ending entirely, and the city was keen to begin reclaiming its once vibrant culture, including the art scene. The time for Francis could not be better, as not only had his confidence in his own art improved, but so had his confidence with other people, which could have played a part into creating the opportunity to truly leave his mark in art history at the Lefebvre Gallery in London in April that year. Francis would begin a project, a triptych that would later be titled Three Studies for Figures at the Base of a Crucifixion in 1944 over the space of 2 weeks in his new South Kensington home studio. Though it should be mentioned that there are some interesting fragments of Francis practicing or perfecting his designs for the Three Studies over the years prior to his finished masterpiece. Francis was still anxious to experiment and improve on his work-in-progress subject of crucifixion, and so the theme would once again make an appearance in his work. The Three Studies would be created with the mediums of oil and pastel, and for economy purposes at the time when the city was recovering from the war, Francis would use light sandala boards rather than canvas. Motivated by newfound confidence in his creativity and his apparent rebellious attitude spurred on from the party lifestyle, Bacon's work on the Three Studies would come together in a unique mindset that he would later
unpredictable
as follows.
horrors
I
of
was in a bad mood of
psychosis.
drinking, and I did it under tremendous hangovers and drink. I sometimes hardly knew what I was doing.
Can't
I think perhaps
imagine
the drink helped me to be a
horrors
bit freer.
that terrify
It should
us.
also be mentioned, Francis was finding yet more ways to fund his art, such as through his partner at the time, Eric Hall, who was not only Bacon's lover, but also a valuable patron. Eric Hall was a leading figure for the Tory party and very wealthy, which was also intertwined with his appreciation for art, as well as his rather more secret life. On the surface, Hall was a very respected man, a loving husband and father, and was considered to be very straightforward and conservative by nature. But he also led a concealed existence. Much like Francis, he enjoyed gambling, drinking heavily, and of course had a secret relationship with Francis, and would be heavily involved in a young artist's life for at least 20 years. From a certain point of view, this could be an early glimpse into how Francis would openly admit that he enjoyed living most aspects of his life with a lot of risk. Not only because of his gambling habits, but in itself is completely reliant on chance, but this early relationship with Hall was completely playing with fate. Should their affair ever be discovered, this would ruin not only Bacon's reputation, but it would mean the end of absolutely everything for Hall. Eric Hall would eventually buy and donate Bacon's Three Figures triptych to the Tate Gallery roughly 10 years later in 1953. Had it not been for this dangerous yet beneficial relationship, it could be argued that the Three Studies would have ultimately slipped into obscurity. Francis was continuing to make valuable friends in the art world, thanks to his charm and extravagant casino parties. One such friend and fellow artist that would prove to be crucial to Bacon's success with the Three Studies would be neo-romantic artist Graham Sutherland. Despite being from completely different backgrounds and showing completely different temperaments, the pair had grown close in the 1940s, and Sutherland in particular was a keen admirer of Bacon during this period. Sutherland was already an established artist with noteworthy connections in the art scene, and was soon due to exhibit his art alongside other fellow artists, such as the popular sculpturist at the time Henry Moore, at what used to be the Lefebvre Gallery in April 1945, and he was keen to exhibit the work of his friend Francis Bacon as well.
Art is completely worthless.
In the early
at this
20th
point.
century, it was considered to be
Because
one of the
AI
most
has taken
lucrative
over all
galleries
our
in the city,
goddamn
exhibiting
creative
artwork
forces.
from the likes of Salvador Dali,
people think
Ernest
that
Lowry,
AI
and René Magritte, just to name a few. Francis was not originally considered to feature on the bill for the
This is the
exhibition until another artist had dropped out from the
I just
event,
don't get it.
which led Sutherland to eventually recommend Francis Bacon as an ideal replacement by pulling one or two strings. This new opportunity for Francis would propel his motivation. After so many years of scrapping and editing paintings, he was finally ready to complete and release some art once again. Bacon was asked if he could provide at least 4 or 5 paintings, and so he decided he would include his figure in a landscape painting,
burned out
and of
by
course, his Three Studies.
just a
And by the time
compulsion
the fateful day had arrived, and from the very moment
of
people
wanting to
first
paint
entered the
because I
Lefebvre
feel like I'm
Gallery
such a
and laid
terrible
eyes on the
artist.
terrifying works of Bacon, art would
Sometimes
never
I
be
gotta
the same
remind
again.
myself that sometimes you don't have to please every fucking people.
So
Fuck
even
what the
though we have already
internet
had a brief
just
look into
doesn't
the Three
support,
Studies triptych in the intro of
just
part 1,
try
there are so many fascinating and various ways of looking at
experiment with
Bacon's
other
first real masterpiece, but it's certainly worth revisiting
already
to
did
discuss a
sell
few
about
theories and
3,
meanings
4
behind these 3 paintings. Let's first start off with probably the most noticeable feature in all 3 paintings, which is the colour scheme on more specifically, the vivid red-orange background.
More than
even this choice of color
average
would be enough
person
to
can
unsettle the
do.
public during its first reveal.
Which I guess
The
that's
intense
good
fire-like
enough.
color would remind a lot of Londoners of the raging fires that came from the
dad
German
was
bombs that the city was
maybe
still
one day
recovering
those
from at this
will
stage.
be up in
It would
big
also heavily
museums,
emphasize
they'll
the
cost
shape and color
millions
of the
of
three
dollars.
figures in the foreground,
I do
giving off a
appreciate
certain
his
depth perception that the figures are almost approaching
positive
closer to the viewer the
outlook
longer
on
you
it,
look
but
at them.
I just don't see that
This is a
happening.
result of how empty
Either
and
those paintings
featureless their
become
environment
worthless or
is,
they'll just
leaving
be
a
in the
feeling of pure
garbage.
isolation, with only these terrible creatures for company, and with no one
Sad.
to hide from them.
But then
Looking
again,
closer at the first painting
I don't
displayed
know
on the
what
left,
is my
I for many
problem
reasons
with
actually find this to be
thinking
the
so
most
negatively.
interesting of the three figures.
as every
Although each
art,
figure is
artist
painted
is
to be
their own
deliberately
critic.
ambiguous regarding what they are and what features they
Then
have,
again,
the figure on the left
my
appears to have
painting
most, if not all, of its facial
sold
features hidden
for
behind a thick, tangled mop
$250.
of hair, with only a nose or possibly an ear
I
protruding
just
through
don't
the
get it.
hair.
Why would someone
This will
throw
probably
that
sound
away?
absolutely crazy, but for some reason,
Perfectly
whenever I look
earned
at
money
I
in this
feel
economy.
really repulsed. I get that feeling of whenever you're cleaning a plug hole in the shower and you look down and you find that
Why would
gross,
anyone
wet,
throw that
slimy,
away?
tangled ball of hair in the drain. Like, ugh. It might sound ridiculous, I know, but I can't help but get the same sensation whenever I look at this
Sometimes I
figure for
wish
long
I
periods of
was
time. Like the
more
other figures, the
positive.
neck is long and
It's not
protruding
really easy
downwards
dealing
towards
with
the ground, almost like a wounded or submissive
amounts of
animal,
dread
or otherwise an animal about to pounce or
nihilism.
attack. Again, like the other figures, the contorted body appears to be organic, like pale skin, yet at the same time it appears almost metallic or carved out of stone. The figure is slumped on top of a table or platform, with what I can only describe as some kind of velvet sheet or blanket draped around it. But it is wrapped tight, as if the figure is tightly bound and is trying to pull away from someone or something outside of our field of view. Moving on to the painting in the middle, we see a less subdued and more hostile figure, snarling aggressively and directly towards the viewer. The body is bulbous and appears to be supported by thin tripod legs. The neck, in comparison to the body, is also thin and protruding like a worm out of a round mass, arching downwards and curving its face towards the viewer in a manner like a snake about to strike. His face, possibly his eyes, are covered in crude bandages above the terrible mouth and exposed teeth and gums, with lips that appear swollen.
I guess
Some
the only
believe this
reason I
figure to
feel
be a
like
homage
such
to
a failure
Matthias
is 'cause
Grenfeld's mocking of Christ, which displays Jesus Christ
Oh, wow.
blindfolded again by crude
Everyone's
white
got
rags
their
or
lives
bandages,
all
which of
together.
course is also themed on the
I just
crucifixion.
don't got anything.
Mark Stevens, one of the joint writers alongside Annalyn Swan for the biography book Francis Bacon, Revelations, gives quite an interesting
I
and unique view
am
on the central
very
figure in their 2021
flawed.
interview with Henny Talks.
The central figure is very, very disturbing.
And I
He's
see
eyeless.
other artists.
He has a
and I'm
bandage
like,
around his head, great grinning
Jeez.
mouth. But he's disturbing mostly because he's intimate. He's like a relative that you don't want to, a disagreeable relative that you don't want to know. Somebody who's going to slide down the bar and begin talking to you. In other words, he's
I guess the
close.
only
And
reason
what
why
that
I
means
failed-
is that as Londoners
I
look
feel such a
at these
failed
monsters,
artist.
these half-human monsters,
Because my
they
parents
can't just
threw
say,
away
oh,
some
it was
of
the
the
Germans'
paintings
fault.
because they
It
were
was
too
other people.
satanic.
That intimate look of that central figure says, no, the monster is also us.
When it's just a bunch of
Okay,
alien
so
fetuses
you
being
deal with laws and
crucified.
regulations at work,
Just
but
such a
you're not a lawyer.
weird
Maybe you own a
perspective
business,
to
or
have.
you work in compliance, or HR, or you're a nonprofit.
Aliens
Wouldn't
crucifying
it be
their
nice
own
to know the fundamentals of the
fetuses.
law, like contracts, employment
Which is
law,
an
and navigating
interesting
regulations? The Master of
thing to
Legal
say.
Studies is for you. A
guess
one-year
that my
online
parents
graduate
don't see
degree
it
from
that
the
way.
University of Utah's College of Law. Learn essential legal skills without going to law school. Learn more at mls.utah.edu.
Finally, we come to the remaining figure on the right. There have been many interesting observations on this figure, probably due to the fact that there are so many possible meanings behind the screaming, eyeless mouth that we see gaping towards the ceiling. WorldsBestPaintings.net described it as a silent growl. The Revelations book described the mouth as waiting for some kind of dreadful nourishment from the sky. Art critic David Sylvester
AI.
described it
Fuck
as yawning.
AI.
And another freelance art critic for The Independent,
Fuck
Sue Hubbard,
corporations and their
described it as
stupid
in the grips of some bestial
bullshit.
orgasmic spasm.
AI
But I found the article from
crap they shoved down
FrancisBacon.com
our
quite
throats.
intriguing, claiming that the mouths in the three studies are deliberately reminiscent of fascist dictators taken from propaganda images of them making speeches. Specifically, a press image of a Nazi politician, Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, that Bacon apparently kept in his art studio, presumably for reference. This would make sense given the time period and the reactions of the observers still disturbed by the war. As we've already seen, Francis was frequently inspired by the images of screaming mouths and felt a strong desire to incorporate them into his work, which takes on multiple meanings in his art following his completion of the three studies, which we will get onto in due course. The body of this figure is slightly more defined than the other two, with more obvious, human-like features presented, such as the singular limb it is leaning on, resembling a clearer appearance of an arm or leg, and a slight resemblance of a rib cage under the skin that can be seen on the figure's side. Although this figure, like the other two, is blind and seemingly without eyes at all, it does possess ears, or at least one ear, which to me is a fearsome concept. It reminds me of the film Don't Breathe. The idea that a person or animal is blind but exceptionally good at hearing and uses that to their advantage to hunt or kill is just really terrifying to me. It also gives off the impression that this monster is screaming so maniacally, with its mouth open so wide, it could be in fact blocking its own eyes. Which again is a pretty uncomfortable concept for a mouth to open to a degree considered impossible for the human skull. The curious object of a brush or isolated patch of grass is probably the most mysterious aspect of a right-hand painting. I've not yet found many explanations for this, but art historian and friend of Francis, Michael Pepiot, describes the object as a sort of scrubbing brush in the Brush with Violence documentary for the BBC. And from what we know of Francis Bacon's experience growing up and caring for horses and suffering from asthma attacks brought on by animal hair and stable dust, the screaming mouth above the limb that's resting on the brush could represent gasping and fighting for air, whilst the brush could represent a body brush used to groom horses. So then could this be a representation of a traumatic childhood memory poured into this painting? Well, no, that's just me thinking out loud due to not having a chance to interview and ask Francis Bacon myself. And of course, art is always subjective, and I'd love to hear what you guys see in these paintings, especially if you see something entirely different to me, so please let me know in the comments. I was also surprised to learn that Bacon would also recreate this panel at some stage. In this painting called Fury, we can see here, the painting is nearly completely identical, except this time, the figure is opening its mouth to what looks like a bouquet of flowers. There is also another painting of his completed around the same time, called A Man in a Cup, which displays a chaotic, tangled web of black brushstrokes, a ghostly glimpsing mouth, and a glimpse of a fiery red background behind. Bacon would later describe his own thoughts behind the meaning of his three studies in various ways, and in various depth over the years. But he did happen to admit that the figures were particularly inspired by the furries. Wait, no, sorry, hang on. I know this could be a scandalous discovery of Francis Bacon for all we know, but let me just make sure I get this right before I offend an entire community. Oh, the Furies! The ancient Greek mythical agents of revenge who pursued Orestes in Aeschylus' tragedy. Of course, what was I thinking? Okay, moving on. During this exhibition of the Lefebvre Gallery, one English art critic for the Sunday Times, named John Russell, would famously recount his experience witnessing the paintings for the first time. In 1971, he looked back on the experience saying the shocking images were, quote, so unbelievedly awful that the mind shuts with a snap at the very sight of them. Their anatomy was half human, half animal. They were confined in a low-ceilinged, windowless and oddly proportioned space. They could bite, probe and suck, and they had very long eel-like necks, but their functioning in other respects was mysterious. He would also say quite profoundly that there was painting in England before the three studies, and painting after them, and no one can confuse the two. And sure enough, nothing could be more true, because the three studies would signal merely just the start of a collage of haunting paintings that would continue to disturb the careless and unsuspecting eye.
Summer savings are heating up at RC Willey, and this week you'll find hot savings during our appliance sale. Shop the season's hottest prices on top brand appliances that are in stock and ready for immediate delivery. Say hello to hassle-free appliance shopping with experts who help you find the perfect fit for cooking, cleaning, and keeping things fresh with the right refrigerator for your home. Plus, we offer flexible financing with zero and low interest options, so it's easy to stay on budget while upgrading your home for summer. RC Willey, tap for incredible savings.
Following the opening at the Lefebvre, curious whispers of this new Dr. Frankenstein of the art community who was creating these nightmarish monsters would begin to cascade across the city. But even so, Bacon would be reluctant at first to answer any questions or reveal any meaning in his work to the public. This would birth the romantic myth that existed for many years following the exhibition that Bacon had not painted a single piece since the 30s, until finally creating the Three Figures masterpiece at the Lefebvre in 1945. Of course, we know this is not true, but Francis would still encourage this rumour by stating, quote, "I began with 3 studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion." These, of course, had already been purchased by Eric Hall before the exhibition and would later be donated to the Tate, and Bacon's cousin, Diana Watson, would purchase the additional painting, Figure in a Landscape. This singular painting, despite the impact that the 3 studies paintings created that day, was apparently more the direction that Francis Bacon had in mind for future projects. Francis by this time was beginning to move on from his influence of Picasso, which he openly admitted was another driving force behind his triptych, of which some harsh critics were not shy to point out. Francis would continue to experiment and recreate more versions of the panels from the 3 studies triptych, like we saw with the right-hand panel earlier, but noticeably in these versions, his colour palette begins to change from bright red backgrounds to more subdued and eerie dark tones. His subject interests are also evolving to feature things like items of clothing, inanimate objects, and flowers, and other fauna. What I find most interesting about this period in his paintings is Bacon's signs of testing the limits and functions of oil paint, exploring his capabilities as a painter to see what he can create. Bacon would once mention that whenever he would paint, he would try to do so subconsciously, leaving things to chance, and so a lot of the surreal imagery we can see in these examples are purely accidental and a result of experimentation.
I make a kind of outline of the position in which I want to try. I think I want to make the image, but after that, chance and what I call accident takes over, and if anything ever does work in my case, it works from that moment when consciously I don't know what I'm doing. At that moment, I'm thinking of nothing but how hopeless and impossible this thing is to achieve. And by making these marks about which I don't know how they will behave, suddenly there comes something which your instinct seizes on as being for a moment the thing by which it could begin to develop.
One of the best known examples of this style of painting would be the painting titled And I'm Being Deadly Serious, Painting, created in 1946, consisting of oil and pastel. I should probably mention at this point, I love Bacon's art, but some of his titles did need a little bit of work, I think. Regardless, this haunting display of meat, blood, and sharp black shadows is a result of many transformations that Francis would explain in great detail. He claimed that he was originally attempting to paint a bird descending onto a field, but as he continued, the imagery turned into an assemblage of meat carcasses. Below the carcasses, we can see a half-decapitated man with just his lower jaw remaining. Either that or the rest of his face is hidden in the shadow from a black umbrella. Conceptual artist Damien Hirst would describe this umbrella as being so strangely terrifying, despite it being such a mundane, everyday object. This could be a result of Bacon's masterful use of black paint and sharp white lines, giving off the appearance of a bat rather than an umbrella that is swooping down to ensnare the headless man below. Fellow artist and by this time a close friend of Francis, Graham Sutherland, was immensely impressed with his work. This painting would prompt Sutherland to take advantage of his connections on Bacon's behalf once again, when he would contact a reputable dealer, Erica Browson, to get in touch with the new artist. Erica too was mesmerised by the unique and terrifying presence that the painting radiated, and so would purchase the painting and exhibit it almost all around the world at many different group exhibitions, from the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris to the Museum of Modern Art in New York throughout the late 40s. He would also land himself a long-term residency at Rausen's Hanover Gallery for a further 12 years. Things would seem on the up for the recently shy and reserved Francis Bacon, but of course, he was still young and somewhat reckless. By the time his 1946 painting was bought by Eric, Francis would move back to France, this time to the southern coast, at the French Riviera district of Monte Carlo in Monaco. Monte Carlo was famous back in the day for being a sort of haven for those who lived for the gambling lifestyle, which of course Francis knew all too well, ever since childhood, when his father, Edward Bacon, would get his son to place bets at the bookies for him, the only real bonding time he and his father ever shared. Gambling has always seemed to surround him, and Francis
Have to work.
The roulette tables in Monte Carlo, considered to be Bacon's favourite method of gambling, worked more in the player's favour according to their rules. The French version had 1 rather than 2 zeros on the wheel.
Tuned.
The game was slower